For about 30 years, the first thing your browser said to every website it visited was a short line of text describing itself, the browser name, the version, the operating system, and a trail of legacy nonsense nobody has needed since the 90s. That line is the user agent, and for most of the web's history, it was the main way a site knew what it was talking to. It is also the single most lied about string in the entire browser, and today I want to explain what it actually does, why the industry is quietly replacing it, and why changing it is the least useful thing an anti-detect setup can do. Quick note on framing before I start. I run real proxy and cloud phone farms, and I test how these browsers handle identification for a living. I am keeping this third person and defensive throughout, how the mechanism works and how it is defended. Not a recipe against any particular site, and there are no undetectable promises here. This is one signal among dozens, and understanding it mostly teaches you how little it does on its own. So start with the string itself. A typical user agent claims a browser engine, a version number, a platform, and then a pile of tokens that exist purely for historical compatibility. It will often claim to be several browsers at once. That is not a bug. It is 30 years of websites sniffing for a competitor's name and browsers pretending to be that competitor so the page would render. The result is a string that is part identification, part fossil record, and almost entirely unverified. That word unverified is the important one. The user agent is not measured, computed, or derived from anything. The browser simply asserts it the same way you would fill in a form. Nothing checks it. Any extension, any automation tool, any browser setting can change it in a second, and the site receives the new claim exactly as sincerely as the old one, which is precisely why it stopped being trustworthy and why detection stopped treating it as evidence. Here is the part that matters for anyone thinking about profiles. Because the user agent is so easy to change, it is not used to establish what you are. It is used to establish whether you are consistent. It has become a claim to be checked against everything else, and everything else is much harder to fake. Let me make that concrete, because this is the whole lesson. A user agent says Windows, but the fonts the browser exposes are the ones that ship with a Mac. The graphics renderer string names Apple Silicon. The way the browser reports certain measurements follows the Mac convention. The time zone is one place, the language is another. The network says somewhere else entirely. Not one of those is a forbidden value. The finding is the disagreement. The profile claimed Windows and the machine underneath kept answering as a Mac, and the string was the only thing that lied because the string was the only thing that could. This is why a setup that changes the user agent and nothing else is worse off than one that changed nothing. Before, it was an ordinary Mac. Now it is a Mac claiming to be a Windows box, which is a much smaller and much more interesting group to belong to. There is a second layer of this that catches people, and that is version drift. Browsers update constantly. A real population of users sits across a handful of recent versions, with a distribution that shifts week by week as updates roll out. A profile pinned to a version that stopped shipping 2 years ago is not just old, it is statistically strange, and it stays strange forever because it never moves. Worse, an old claimed version paired with modern browser features that only exist in current releases is another flat contradiction. The string says one era, the capabilities say another. Now the interesting development, and the reason this topic is worth a video in 2026 rather than 5 years ago. The industry is deliberately shrinking the user agent and replacing it with something called client hints. The reasoning is straightforward. The old string leaked a lot of detail to every site automatically, whether the site needed it or not, and that detail fed fingerprinting, so the approach was inverted. Instead of announcing everything up front, the browser now sends a small, deliberately boring summary by default, and a site that genuinely needs more has to ask for it explicitly. Those requests are split into 2 groups, and the split is the whole point. The low entropy hints are the ones considered safe enough to send to everybody because they barely narrow anything down. Broad platform, whether the device is mobile, a coarse brand, and major version. The high entropy hints are the detailed ones, full version numbers, the platform version, the processor architecture, the specific model on mobile. Those are the identifying ones, and a site has to specifically request them. That sounds like a privacy improvement, and in one narrow sense it is. The default surface is smaller, but I want to be honest about what it does not do, because this gets oversold constantly. The detail did not disappear. It moved behind a request that any site can make, and the sites most interested in identifying you are exactly the sites that will make it. Asking is not a meaningful barrier, so for a serious detection system, client hints changed the shape of the conversation and very little else. What did change is that there is now a second surface that has to stay consistent with the first, and this is where tooling falls behind. A browser now describes itself in two places, the shrunken legacy string and the hint values, and those two have to agree with each other and with the machine underneath. A tool that rewrites the old string but leaves the hints reporting the true platform has created a fresh contradiction that did not exist before client hints shipped. That is a real failure mode. It has been common and it is easy to test for. There is also an ordering detail worth knowing. Some hints arrive with the very first request, others only after the site asks and the browser responds on the next one. So the picture a site builds develops over a couple of round trips rather than arriving complete. A setup that is consistent on the first request and inconsistent on the second has still been caught just a moment later. Mobile deserves its own paragraph here because it is where the string still carries real weight. On Android, the user agent has traditionally included a device model token, an actual hardware name sitting in plain text. That token is far more identifying than anything in a desktop string because it narrows you to a specific handset rather than a broad platform. It also has to agree with a long list of other things, the screen dimensions that model actually has, the pixel ratio it actually ships with, the graphics renderer inside it, and the browser versions that model can actually run. A claimed flagship phone reporting a screen size that model never shipped with is one of the easier contradictions to catch in this whole space. And it is common because picking a model name is easy and reproducing that model's entire measurement profile is not. There is also a piece of history worth knowing because it explains why so much tooling has a blind spot here. For years, the simplest way to catch an automated browser was to read the user agent because headless browsers announced themselves in it. There was a literal token in the string saying this is a headless build. An enormous amount of detection was built on that one check, and an enormous amount of evasion was built on removing it. Both of those are now largely irrelevant because the token was removed from the default builds and detection moved on to behavioral and rendering signals years ago. But the folklore survived. You still find guides treating the user agent as the thing that gives automation away, and setups that carefully sanitize the string while leaking through 5 other channels that are actually being measured. The honest summary of that history is that the user agent was never a strong signal. It was a convenient one. When it stopped being convenient, detection replaced it quickly and without much difficulty, which tells you how little was resting on it. So how does this get handled properly, and what should someone actually look for? The good tools treat the user agent and the client hints as one description of a single machine generated together from the same underlying profile, and consistent with the platform signals that are not declared at all. The browser build, the platform, the version, the architecture, the fonts, the renderer, the measurement conventions, and the plausible time zone all describe the same computer. It is unglamorous and it is the entire job. The weak tools offer a text box. You type a user agent, it sends that user agent, and nothing else in the browser moves. That is not spoofing a platform. It is putting a label on a box and hoping nobody looks inside. There is a middle category too, and it is the one worth watching because it looks convincing from the feature list. These tools do generate a coherent set of values, but they generate it once from a template and then hand the same template to everyone. Every profile gets a plausible machine, and it is the same plausible machine, internally consistent, externally shared, and that shared combination becomes a link between accounts that were supposed to look unrelated. Consistency alone is not the goal. Consistency plus a population you actually blend into is the goal. And the actively harmful approach is randomizing the string per session. A user agent that changes every visit describes a person who reinstalls a different browser every morning. It also breaks the version distribution logic, because a real user's version moves forward slowly and never backwards. Randomized strings jump around, and jumping around is not something real browsers do. Practically, the useful habits are simple. Check that the declared platform matches the platform signals you did not declare. Check that the claimed version is current and moves forward over time rather than being frozen. Check that the client hints and the legacy string tell the same story, including after the site asks for the high entropy ones, and stop treating the user agent as a disguise, because it has not functioned as one for years. I test these browsers on real multi-account setups, and the written reviews and the picks I actually trust are all at antidetectbrowser.org. What those reviews do is show what each tool actually sends on both surfaces rather than repeating what the feature list claims. So the short version, the user agent is the oldest and weakest identification signal on the web because the browser simply asserts it and nothing verifies it. That weakness is exactly why detection now uses it as a consistency check rather than as evidence, and a string that disagrees with the machine underneath is more identifying than an honest one. Client hints shrink the default surface and split detail into low and high entropy groups, but the detail is still available on request, and they add a second surface that has to stay consistent with the first. Tools that generate both from one coherent profile handle it. Tools that offer a text box do not. Full written reviews and tested picks are at antidetectbrowser.org. And if this was useful, subscribe for honest, tested anti-detect browser reviews.